We're still in Revelation chapter 2 and are now on the church of Pergamos, which begins in verse 12 and ends in verse 17. Go ahead and read through each verse for yourself first. Then, as we continue the study, we will address each verse individually. The Christian church has begun, Ephesus, with the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. They were on fire for Jesus, but they were in danger of losing their first love. And that's the apostasy which crept into this early church just towards the end of the first century, 100 AD, as the apostles were dying off. Then the church goes through some fierce persecution, which culminates in 303 to 313 AD under Diocletian, nicknamed Jovius. Persecution ended in 313, and in steps a man by the name of Constantine. Constantine's rule of Western Rome began in 306, but he began to favor Christians beginning in 312 and played an influential role in the proclamation of the Edict of Milan in 313, which declared tolerance for Christians in the Roman Empire, thereby ending the 10 years of fierce persecution. Prior to ruling, Constantine actually fled Rome from then ruling Emperor Diocletian. He went to England, where his father was. He worked under him for a while until his father died. While there, Constantine became very strong in his influence with his soldiers, and because of this, was able to go back to Rome and eventually take power. He had watched what happened with the Christians and how they had been persecuted and how the persecution had affected the empire. He saw that the blood of Christians was seed, so he watched the strength of the Christian church grow, and he decided rather than persecute them, I need their help, I need their aid, I need them to be on my side. And so after the Edict of Milan, Constantine began to restore to the Christians their lands, their rights, their personal property, and their churches. He overturned Diocletian's persecution and was able to gain the support of the Christians. Through him, Christianity was raised to the throne of Rome, but it was at a terrible cost, as Christians compromised their faith to do so. Constantine professed to be a Christian, like his mother, who supposedly converted him. However, he was a nominal Christian, because he still believed in a lot of the pagan traditions of Rome, and wanted to keep those in Christianity. He was likely baptized by Pope Sylvester I, that is, according to the Catholic Church. He was a civil magistrate. He was the leader. He became the sole ruler of the Roman Empire by 324. After the civil wars of the Tetrarchy was over, and so this was the time when the church was elevated. The word Pergamos means acropolis or elevation. The period that we're looking at here is about 313 to 538 AD, and it's a time in the age of Constantine when the status of the church is elevated in the world, yet that elevation comes at a terrible cost. The cost of compromise is what we see taking place here in this period of the church, of the Christian church history. The doctrine of Nicolaitans, which we discussed in our lesson about Ephesus, included compromise, which sets the stage for Pergamos. Naturally, the number of converts increased most rapidly, and multiple cathedrals were erected. The doctrine of him who said, "He that is greatest among you shall be your servant," was reversed, and the papal hierarchy grew rapidly. This was especially true of the Roman See. Sitting in the seat of the dragon was finally the acknowledged head of the church, the Christian church. Remember when we talked about the second church being under intense persecution? When under persecution, we're more apt to be faithful than when we're not being persecuted. Additionally, the church of Smyrna was being motivated by the idea that when the persecution ended, the second coming of Christ was next. But this perspective was swept away when the emperor of Rome, the conceived man of sin, became the friend of Christians. Now the faithful ones within the church are left in a conundrum, likely thinking, now what? So who's the man of sin, the son of perdition? What's going to become of the church now? Constantine comes in and elevates the church and says, hey, you know what? No more persecution for you. As a result, things start looking up for the church, right? At this time, where are those who say they are Jews and are not? Revelation 2:9. Where were they when persecution was going on for the second church? They were compromised. They were hiding in the shadows. They were not standing in the light with the true followers of Christ. When Constantine comes up on the scene and Christianity is elevated, guess who are the ones that come out of the shadows to the forefront to seek positions of influence and trust? The compromisers from the second church period, or people of that sort. Constantine, we can help you, and you need our help, and we're willing to compromise, was their remark. These so-called Jews were already compromising under the second church period, Smyrna, so now you have this marrying of the church and state under this man named Constantine. This results in the people putting more trust in a king instead of their high priest in heaven. They began to trust Rome. Rome is going to be our protector, so they thought. Remember, this is a love story. So Jesus is saying, I'm supposed to be your protector. What do you mean Rome is now your protector? You're marrying whom? Rome? Wait a minute. I'm your husband, your house band. I'm your protector. What the compromising church is saying is, well, you didn't do a good job of protecting us, so we're going to Rome for protection. This is what is called a love story drama unfolding before us. She seeks to marry one other than her husband. That sounds like an affair, doesn't it? It sounds like they're truly getting divorced. If they're compromising, then they're having an affair. They're cheating. It's as if they are saying, well, take some of this, but we'll go ahead and get some of that too. Well, we see this picture in the Old Testament, in the book of Hosea. It's really clear. Read Hosea 2, verses 7 to 10. And she shall follow after her lovers, but she shall not overtake them, and she shall seek them, but shall not find them. Then shall she say, I will go and return to my first husband, for then was it better with me than now. For she did not know that I gave her corn and wine and oil, and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal. Therefore will I return and take away my corn in the time thereof, and my wine in the season thereof, and will recover my wool and my flax given to cover her nakedness. And now will I discover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and none shall deliver her out of mine hand. Hosea 2, verses 7 to 10. It's as if he's saying, you were supposed to call me husband, but since you didn't, there will be consequences. The whole history of ancient Israel is being repeated here in the New Testament Christian church. As we move through these churches, we are seeing that the same history being repeated. Now, what about some of these symbols in Revelation 2, 13 to 17? Let's start with verse 13. I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is, and thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antiochus was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth. Revelation 2:13. What is this talking about historically? When the Bible says where Satan's seat is, Satan has set up his authority at this point in time. The church in this age becomes immediately connected with this power called Satan, which is the devil, thereby becoming papal Rome. We will tie this to a third trumpet in a later study. But when we look at the setting up of, it's clear that Satan is now setting up his authority, which he did not have in church number 1 and church number 2. But now we see a seat there. So what's happening here? This is like a precursor of something that's coming down the road. Satan is coming in and establishing his seat in the church. What does 2 Thessalonians 2:4 tell us? A man of sin, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4. So Satan's seat is being set up during this church period. Next, let's look at some history regarding the setting up of Satan's seat in the church. When Cyrus captured the city of Babylon, the ancient seat of Satan's counterfeit system of religion, the supreme pontiff of the Chaldean mysteries and his retinue of priests fled from the city and ultimately made their residence in Pergamos. Here they reestablished their Babylonian worship and made the king of Pergamos the chief pontiffs of their religion. When Attalus III, the last of the priest kings, died in 133 BC, he bequeathed both his royal and priestly offices to the Romans. A century later, Caesar became both the emperor of Rome and the Pontificus Maximus of the religion of the empire. He was given divine honors, which he handed down to his successors. These were later assumed by the popes, supreme pontiffs of ecclesiastical Rome. Thus, Pergamos became the connecting link between the two Babylons, the ancient and the modern. The papal system is patterned after that of Babylon and Rome. This is another reason for the statement of Jesus that Pergamos was the place where Satan dwells. This is from Bunch, the 7th Epistles of Christ, page 149 to 150. Getting back to Revelation 2, verse 13, notice it talks about, thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antiochus, my faithful martyr, who was slain. There is no historical record of a man by the name of Antiochus. However, when we look at names, especially as it relates to the 7 churches, we see that these names are symbolic. Balaam, Revelation 2:14, is an Old Testament figure and not alive in the New Testament or in the time of this church. Jezebel, church number 4, Revelation 2:20. Balak, another name. These names all represent something, okay? Just as Jezebel is not alive during the 4th church period, but she is described there. So there's a symbol. behind the names. About the name Antiochus, how do we know that there is no one in history with that name? Where did we get that name from? When you're studying the book of Revelation, history is going to be important. The witness of history is going to be important. It's also good to have commentaries, so you can kind of glean from other scholars on prophecy and history. Let's consider what they said when it comes to this particular verse. Then we've got to take the good and reject the bad. So, historically speaking, as you look at all these figures, you can see reference to the existence of certain characters except Antiochus. There is no record of Antiochus in secular history or in the Bible. So we're just left with the name. So John's referencing names in a symbolic way. And once we come to that conclusion and say, okay, names here in reference to the churches represent symbols, well, that opens it up then for me, not to look at Antiochus as an actual person, but what might this name have meant, or what would the name have been a symbol of. Then the only way we have to do that is to actually look at the name. What does it mean? To further illustrate the significance of names in the Bible, let's first look at some examples. Jesus equals Jehovah is salvation, or he will save his people from their sins. Abraham, many multitudes, or father of many. Achan, troubler. Jacob, heel holder or supplanter. Job, persecuted, hated. Israel, one that will overcome, or God prevails. John, Yahweh is gracious. James, supplanter. Remember, names carry significant meaning. Names in the Bible represent character. So all we have to go on is Antiochus. What do I have left? Let me look at his character, or what his name means. Antiochus is actually two words being brought together. Anti, against, the papas, fathers. Or so here you have this symbol of someone who's against the church fathers. Remember, it's during this time in history that we begin hearing about these so-called church fathers who are claiming to have power, authority over the church. John warned about those who wanted preeminence in the church, and Paul also warned about people who would draw disciples after themselves so that they could exalt themselves. See Acts 20, verse 30. Unlike Paul, John's writing his letter to the church while on the island of Patmos, and he's an aged disciple, a disciple that Jesus loved. See John 13, verse 23 and 19, verse 26. He's been through everything with Christ, gone through everything with the early church, and now God has given him the book of Revelation. John wrote in 3 John chapter 1, verse 9, I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receives us not. What? It's like John's writing to the church saying, I'm a disciple of Christ, an apostle of Christ. I've lived with you. I'm writing to a church where I pastor, and there's someone there who wants to have the preeminence. He won't receive my brothers, the apostles. He won't receive me. What? When I read this, I just think, how could that be? He's a man who walked with Christ, and there are people in the church who won't receive him right in his day, when he's still alive. So, when it says that Satan's seat is being established in the church, What is it talking about? What was Satan wanting? Let's read Isaiah 14, verses 12 to 14. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. In essence, he's saying, I want to be like the Most High. I want worship. I want preeminence. Of course, he didn't really want to be like the Most High because the Most High is like Jesus. The Most High is not like these men who were seeking the preeminence, because to be like the Most High is to be humble. But he wanted the position and the authority. And so when it says Satan's seat, it's talking about the very thing that Satan wanted in Isaiah 14. He wanted authority. He wanted preeminence. He wanted worship, which is what's taking place here as the church compromises. As people come in, they're saying, oh, we don't have to undergo persecution anymore. This is great. We can be Christians and we can prosper and we can have the preeminence that our hearts desire. Then there are people who are saying, no, we're against this. We're against these so-called fathers or popes, these false or counterfeit figures that are saying they're Christian and are not. Even from John's time, they're beginning to establish themselves, and they don't have the Spirit of Christ. As John says in another verse, as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many Antichrists. 1 John 2, verse 18. When Paul's writing his epistle to the 7 churches, he's warning them, watch out for these guys that are coming in. Right now, they're coming in. In the time of the apostle, Paul's writings were years before Revelation was written, and many years before the time the prophecy's fulfillment. We are beginning to see the fruition of what Paul was talking about. Man of sin sitting in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 to 4. This desire for preeminence and division coming in. We're seeing these things being fulfilled here. Where are we in time? Well, we're in the holy place. What time is it? We're in the time just before the 1260. This is the time period where people were coming in on the scene who were claiming to have the preeminence and authority in the church. Antiochus must have been against the preeminence, a faithful martyr. His mentality was, I'm not going to bow, nor call one father who's not. What does the scripture tell us about that concept of calling one father who's not? Have we not all one Father? Hath not God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother? Malachi 2:10. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Matthew 23, verse 9. God is a holy Father, but apparently there were other powers who were now trying to claim that title. Since there is no historic record of a person named Antiochus, we must go with what the name means, against the fathers. Then the meaning of the name has to fit the historic context. So where there are men claiming they're fathers of the church, claiming preeminence in the church, and men who opposed those claims, in so doing becoming martyrs? Yes, there were. Regarding the compromise taking place, someone stated, the faithful followers of Christ at this time said, let there be division even more. So there was a clear demarcation that started to take place here during this time of compromise where God's people are now getting ready to go underground because they're not willing to compromise and allow those pagan principles of preeminence to come in. And it's interesting that preeminence, self-exaltation, leads to the compromise of the truth. It starts with the wrong heart, right here. And then the truth is set aside. Compromise takes its place. And what did Lucifer say in Isaiah 14? I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. Isaiah 14, verses 13 to 14. We've been looking at this pattern in the Old Testament, and we saw the first church. That's Adam onward through Genesis. The second church, persecution. That's the book of Exodus. That's the children of Israel coming out of captivity. Well, guess what part of history occurs with the children of Israel after they came out of Egypt? They entered into the promised land. Persecution is over. We're here, they say. You know what? We don't want a prophet reigning over us. We want a king. And who was that king? Saul. And who was Saul? He was the anointed one, who was beautiful. He was comely to look at. But guess what? That anointed one ended up turning against God. That story sounds very familiar. What led to Saul's downfall? He was a king who fell because he took the authority of the priesthood. Note 1 Samuel chapter 13. In other words, in him was a combination of church and state, exactly what we saw Constantine brought. As Saul persecuted God's faithful people, see 1 Samuel 22, verses 6 to 24, he even tried to kill his son, Jonathan, 1 Samuel 20, verse 33, and the beloved David, 1 Samuel 18, verses 6 to 16, and it was a love story because God said to Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. That is exactly what the church of Pergamos ends up doing and rejecting their high priest or earthly king. We want their protection. We want to be like the nations around us. We want authority now where we've been persecuted too long. Give us a king. Check 1 Samuel 8 to 15. What ends up happening? They, in essence, reject their high priest for a king. But there is another story we can find in the scriptures before the book of Joshua to Samuel that's equally applicable here, which we will address in our next study.